I'm writing React code since 3 years already, but in this year, something clicked in my understanding state in React components. Let's be honest, if you wanna be good front-end developer while working with React, then you have to understand concept of state and how it works. In this episode, we will explore the mysterious world of components memory. By the end of this episode, you should have a strong understanding of what state is and how to use it effectively in your ReactJS components. Let's get started. Hi there, my name is Daniel Noworyta and I want to welcome you on my channel. If you want to get your first job in IT and grow as a web developer, this is correct place for you. There are moments when your React components needs to change what's on the screen as a result of interaction with user. Try to imagine typing in some input field. We want to see what's there and we want to react on users typing activities. Our component need to remember current input value. Let's look at this example.
I have some example with input here. We have just simple create React app. We have one input on our screen. Let's try handle values for this input. At the beginning, I want to show you naive approach. So let's make some variable here, which is string with this value. Programmista frontend is the name of my channel. Let's make some function handle input change, which will get event and set this value as event target value. So let's get rid of this console log now and let's console log our value in our component. Let's refresh our page. And we have value which is set to Programmista frontend. Yeah, you can think, okay, we connected on change, handle input change, and we are setting value to whatever we have in our input. So let's try to write something here. Nothing changed. Console log is not working. Let's try to put this console log inside our handle input change handler function. And let's try to write something now. So I will refresh my component. Now we didn't get any console log because our console log is firstly triggered when we trigger handle input change. So let's try to write something here. We see value is set to something different, but this is not showed in our React component, yes? What we know now is like changing inside variables, it's not triggering new render in our React component.
There are two main reasons why it happens. First one is local variables doesn't persist between renders, and second one, changes to local variables won't trigger new renders. Now we know why our component didn't get any update on typing activity. Then what we need to do is, first of all, provide a way for our component to remember updated value from typing activity. And second, we need to provide a way to tell our component, hey, render yourself new and update this value. Our component needs memory for storing input value. This kind of specific memory for React component is called state. State allows us to retain data between renders. Updating state automatically triggers new render for component. So it seems that's exactly what we need here. So let's use one of the most important hooks provided for us by React maintainers called useState. Let's update our example.
Now let's update our example and add some state hook which will work with our state. Each time when we call useState hook, we are telling React, hey, our component want to remember something. So in this example, we are setting state of this input as empty string, and for now I will just console log this. Let's log in. So at the beginning value is empty string, yes? So now each time when we write something, value gets updated and React re-render this component and show us new value which is set in the state. So one more time, each time when you call useState, you are getting value and set value. One thing, value is your variable, is your value which is kept in the memory, and second thing, set value is your setter function which is helping you setting new value between renders and triggering new render for React component. So now question will be if this will work the same if we have two inputs here and each of those inputs will have their own useState hook. So let's try to extract our input to some separate components. So we have here single div. This looks like nice component for me. So let's make function some input which would be like this, and here we will return our JSX. And of course we need to move our handlers and state the components itself. Now we have our custom input, and in the place from our old input we will just render custom. Here we can get rid of this. Maybe this console logs, let's for now get rid of them. Let's use two inputs. We'll just render two inputs. We have input 1 and input 2 here. We can actually create separate input, but I want to show you something, how to understand the state correctly. I mean, now we are not passing anything to these inputs, but look, I will change something in one. The second one is still like has his own state. So the question is, how React knows which component has which state, because here we are not passing any identifiers. Look, we are rendering the same component, but React somehow is able to give us correct states for each of those inputs.
Internally, React holds an array of state pairs for every component. It also maintains the current pair index, which is set to 0 before rendering. Each time you call useState, React gives you the next state pair and increments the index. Important thing to know that state is unique and private for component. That's why two same inputs have different states and changing one of them not affecting the other. This is really important to understand for now. So state is not tied to a particular function call or a place in the code, but it's local to the specific place on the screen. State variables look like normal JavaScript variables that you can read and write to. However, state behaves more like a snapshot. Setting new state will trigger new rendered cycle for your component. If you wanna that your interface reacts for any interaction, you have to update its state. If we will go back to previous example and see what exactly happens when you write new value in one of the inputs, order of events looks like this. You type something in the input field, then handle input change event handler triggers and setting new value for value state, and then React re-renders component according to the new value state, and you see changes in your UI. And for a long time, I didn't really understand how it works under the hood. What rendering means for us is React is calling our component, which is function. JSX, which you returns from this function, is your snapshot in particular time. All of props, event handlers, and local variables were calculated using state at the time of the render. So when React re-renders your component, few things happens. First, React calls your function again. Your function returns a new JSX snapshot. Then React updates your screen to match the snapshot you've returned from your function. The key thing to understand is that component state is not disappearing after your function returns JSX. State is living instance in React. It's somehow outside of your function. When React calls your component, it gives you a snapshot of the state for that particular render. One important thing to know is that setting state only changes it for the next render. Take a look at this example from React docs. What do you think? What will be the result of clicking button with +3 label on it? Remember that I've said that setting state changes it only for next rendered cycle. Let's check the answer. Even though we called set number 3 times, in these renders event handler number is always 0. So you set the state 3 times. That's why after your event handler finishes, React re-renders the component with number equal to 1 rather than 3. So you can imagine this like that. For the next render, your handlers are like, that's why when you click your button many times, it increments number only by 1. And here it actually doesn't matter if your handler will be an async function or normal. He will always get snapshot of state at the moment of triggering this handler. React keeps state values fixed within one render's event handler. So you don't need to worry whether the state has changed while the code is still running. But there are some situations when we want to have access to latest state before a re-rendered cycle. So then we have another helpful concept, which is state updater function. There is one thing to consider going back to latest example. On your onClick handler, we are calling 3 times set state. React, in meantime, is waiting for all of your set state calls. This lets you update multiple state variables, so from multiple components without triggering too many re-renders. This behavior is known as batching. This makes React app run much faster and avoids us from dealing with confusing half-finished renders where only some of the variables have been updated and others not. What we have to do then when we want to update the same state variable multiple times before the next rendered cycle? We can use state updater function. This is like telling React that before your change state variable, you should do something with it. Take a look at this modified example. To better understand this, think about this like that. Every time React gets function in set state, it's adding this to queue. So in example above, on first function call, n is equal 0. So second one will get n equal 1 and third one is n equal 2. As a result, we are getting 3 in new render. This is crucial to understand. For more detailed examples, I recommend you to read official article from React Docs, and you can find link below in the description to this video. As you know, you can store any variable as a state in React component. One thing to remember though is that when you have multiple values as states, you shouldn't change that value directly. Instead, first create a copy and then set the state by using that copy. Really helpful here would be solid understanding what is mutation in JavaScript. Shortly say, in our JavaScript universe, we cannot change built-in primitive values like numbers, strings, and booleans. If you don't agree with me, try to mutate 0 in JS. This is impossible. If you have any variable referencing to primitive number 0, you cannot mutate this primitive, but what you can do is just point to other primitive value like 1, 2, or 3. Things are different with mutable values like objects and arrays. Technically, it's possible to change contents of the object itself. This we used to call mutation. However, in React, good practice is treating all state values as they were immutable, like primitives from JavaScript. Instead of mutating state value, you should always replace this value. Easier to say, treat any JavaScript objects that you put in a state as a read-only values. Few useful techniques for updating state objects are, for example, creating a copies by using spread syntax. So next time, if you would like to update just one value in your state object, just use spread syntax and then put your property name and property value at the end. One thing to remember is that spread syntax is shallow. That means this technique would be useful only in simple object states. If you would have something deeply nested, you would need to create copies all the way up from the place when you are updating your state. So a package called immer is really helpful to work with immutable state in a more convenient way. I highly recommend you visiting link below and incorporate immer in your workflow. Second type of mutable state values are arrays. Here, story is almost same like by objects. In JavaScript world, arrays are just another type of object. So you should treat arrays as read-only in React state. Here, knowledge about array methods is crucial. When you're working with state which is holding array, avoid using methods which mutates array direct, and instead use methods which returns new array. You can see now on your screen which array methods are mutating original array and which ones are safe, used to say in React world. So now, if you want to add some item to state, instead using push, create new array by using spread operator and add new item at the end. Let me show you this example in the code.
Let's see this working with state and arrays on typical example for React app. I prepared here some simple app. We have players list. So this is list of the players, football players. For now, I just put 4 players from Poland. Here we have just first name, we have ID, we have last name and age for each player. We are showing this by iterating through players state and playing this as a list with LE, where we're showing first name, last name and age. Here underneath I create some simple form for adding new players. So this is the first name, second name and age, but for now you see there's nothing which is allowing us actually to adding new players. Inputs are nothing fancy, just simple values are coming from the state, and setters are also here. So it's typical like you would work in a React app. You have controlled input where you have value and setter for first name, last name and age. And now let's think how we can add first functionality here. So we would like to allow our users adding players by writing in this form here, and by clicking the button here we wanna add some new player to our state. So let's add some handler which would add new player for our list, and here we need of course create new player. So ID is coming from players length +1 for now, just for purposes of this episode. First name is coming from the state, it's here. Last name is coming also from the state, and age is coming from the state, which will be set on changes on these inputs. The next we need to set players. So this is how you would set the new state with array values and put new item at the end of the state. And at the end would be also useful to clear states in our inputs. For now also we need some button. So we need something which will add this state. So let's add this button to our logic. Let's save it. I will refresh this page. And now let's try this logic. So I will try to write Daniel. This is my name, my surname, my age, and then let's add this player. Yeah, we see our logic is working correctly. You can do the same if you want to add the player at the beginning of the list. All what you need to do is just take this item here, put it at the beginning, and the logic would be similar, but now all player or added player would be added at the beginning of the list, not at the end. So if I will click here, I have new player here at the top of the list. So now let's try focus on removing players logic. So let's try to remove players by name. And to remove some item from array, the best method which you can use is actually filtering this array. So let's create now new handler. I mean filtering. Filtering is creating new array which is giving you only items which pass the test which you put in the filter. So in the filter function. So in our solution here, let's try to remove player with names. We will just set players as a players filter. In this place here, you see player. We will get only players where first name is different than name which we will give to this function. For this to work, we also need some handler, I mean button, which is triggering this. So let's create the button here at the bottom, which will remove players with name Daniel. These two players which I've added at the beginning of our test here, they should be removed if I will click this button. So let's save this, let's remove player, and you see two players with name Daniel are removed. Now let's think about modifying all items in our state. So the first thing which is coming on my mind is using map. Map is giving you always new array with modified items. So you can iterate through all items in the array and, for example, add new value to those objects which we have here. So let's say we would like to add club name as a new value here. So we will create handler which will add club property to players, and here we want to map through all players. As you can see here, I'm creating copy of the player object. This is important. Yes, this is how we also work with the object state in React. We are copying the object and then we are setting new values. So here we are iterating through all players. We are just copying the player and just adding new value which will be club, which will have property value, so would be unknown for now. And for this to work, we also need some button with handler on click, add club property to all players, and let's save it. So we have now our button which is adding club property to all players. And to prove this to work, let's console log our players. Let's save it, inspector tools and console here. So we see at the beginning our players don't have property club, and if we use our handler, so let's clear this console, add club property, so there are still 4 players as at the beginning, but now you will see each of those players have extra property which is club unknown. And this is how you should modify all objects in an array if you keep it in the state. So you are mapping, so you're creating new array, and each object, if your items are objects like in my case here, so you have to make copy from each object and put this extra property and the value at the end. There are probably some other cases, use cases which you wanna use here. So for example, you would like to allow our users to put player whatever they want, so on whatever index they want. To do that, you can use slice. By slicing, you can slice array until moment when you want to put new object inside it, then put your new object and then use another slice to get the rest of the state array. So your function would look like this: add player at index. This function will get index add, so it will get index as a property which will tell our function where we should put our new player. So for this we need our next player, so updated state. First we need items before the insertion point. So we need to slice players and finish this slice at the index where we want to put a new item. Then we want to put new item in this index, so we can put our new player like this, which we will get from this form here. And then we want to put another slice to our array, which is after the insertion point. At the end would be also useful to just set our state to new next players and then just clear out all input fields in our form. And for this to work, we will also need some kind of trigger, which will in our case will be button, which will add player at index 2. So here we are calling our function with parameter 2, which will tell, hey, put this player at index 2. So let's try this functionality now. Let's refresh our page. I will get rid of this console. Let's try to view myself and then add player at index 2. So if everything will be fine, we should add our new player Daniel Novorita at index 2 in this list. So let's put it here and you see new player is appearing on the index 2. So 0, 1, 2, actually in the place where we wanna give it. If we will change this to index like, I don't know, 4, I will put Philip 4 and then add player at index. Of course, this description should be different now because we changed this parameter here, but let's trust it, and Philip is added at index 4. So that's how you would allow users like add new items in your state where you're keeping state as an array of items. The last point which I would like to tell you here is updating some items state arrays. So here you have to be careful because if your values are not primitive values, they are mutable, you have to be careful. You have to create some copies. So to update some item by giving ID and updated name, let's say here in this area, you will create handler like this. In this case, it would be like modify player name, where we will put player ID and name, which would be name set it after modifying the player. Here you will need to make copy of your players. This is really important, yes? And here you find the player to change. So you find player by his ID, which will be given in our function. And then you set his first name to name, which will be given also as a prop here. And then you set players as next players. So you see this is the copy. Don't make this mistake that you are copying only the modified object. You have to copy complete state, yes? So this is the important part here. And then to make this all work, we have to create another button which will change the name. Let's say we wanna change the name of the first player to the first player is Robert Lewandowski. He has in ID 1. Change first player name to Tomasz, and let's try to use this functionality. So you see in our list there is Robert Lewandowski as a first player. His name is Robert, but let's click this button. Now there is Tomasz Lewandowski. That's it. I think what you will need to create to modify the state, which is array in React applications. So as a summary, if you want to add something, you can use spread operators and add something at the beginning or at the end. If you want to remove something from your array, just use filter and remove some things by property or by ID. Most cases ID would be enough. If you want to modify like all objects at once, so you can use map and map through all items and set new properties, like in this case was clap as unknown. If you want to add item at particular index, you need to make copy and using slice, don't splice, because those two things are different. So you have to be careful because slice is giving you new array. Yes, so original array will not be modified. This is important here. Last use case which would be used, modify some item. Typical modifier is like this. So you're getting ID and like property which you want to modify. Then you're creating copy of your state and then new player, setting his name here in this case and setting new players.
That's it for today. I hope you've got some useful knowledge from this episode. I'm writing React code since 3 years already, but anyway, during research for this video, there were some eye-opening moments for me. So let me know in the comments if this video was helpful for you. And one more stuff, this episode was my last one in 2022. This was second year for me creating content on this channel and the first year when I've decided to make the switch to English language. So I wanna thank you for your time that you spent with me on this channel in 2022. I wish you all the best for 2023 and see you in the next one. Happy New Year. Cheers.